Host. No audio.
Hello.
No audio. Now the audio is there.
Yeah. Hello.
তো হয়
এরকম কেন হয় জাপানে?
একটু হয়
জাপানের জন্য এরকম কেন হয়? ভালো লোকদের হয় না, একটা জায়গার লোকদের এরকম হয়।
नको स्वयं असं स्वयं तू माझ्या
Hello. Good afternoon. Ayana, am I audible?
Yes, Anish, you are audible. Please go ahead.
We'll be starting the session shortly at 4 p.m. We'll just wait a few more minutes and then we can begin. Well, just everyone else on mute. Thank you. Okay, it's 4 p.m. So we'll begin the session. So good afternoon, everyone. Namaste. My name is Anish Deshpande. I'm a member of Yogastha IIT Bombay. And on behalf of Yogastha, I warmly welcome you all to this webinar on Pranayam. Pranayam is one of the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, and it is a methodology of controlling your breath, pranic energy, for a whole host of mental, physical, and spiritual benefits. To tell us more, we have with us our esteemed speaker, Dr. Raghavendra Sami Balakrishnan. I'll give a quick introduction of Sir. He obtained his BNYS in Naturopathy and Yoga from Dr. MGR Medical University in Tamil Nadu, where he was a gold medalist. He went on to receive a PhD in Yoga and Molecular Biology from the S. Vyasa Yoga University. He is extremely active in research projects from various agencies. His proposals include the management of depression through yoga-based meditation practices, the effect of simplified yoga practices on cardiopulmonary functions, mental well-being, and quality of life, and also projects like holistic health management through yoga and naturopathy on different categories of the population. He has actively conducted classes, consulted patients, and given talks all over the country, even at IIT Bombay on a previous occasion. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic and invite our esteemed speaker to begin the session. So, welcome, sir.
Mr. Anish. So, thank you. Being impressed in organizing this event. So, thank you for this warm introduction as well. So, today we will be discussing about Pranayama, its principles, practice, and relevance during this COVID-19 pandemic. So, just for having better bandwidth, I'll switch off my video. Yeah. So, we all are in a kind of a situation undergoing that from our social communication to our individual lifestyle as well. So with this growing pandemic, every day we have thousands of cases being reported, not only in India but across the world, and it demands serious attention and drastic measures that we have to take at our individual levels. So brushing through the basics for COVID-19, pathophysiology of COVID-19. we would have, most of us would have been aware by this time how this COVID-19 is spreading. Initially, this every day we have new information added about COVID-19. And initially, it was largely considered as something to be restricted only to the lungs. But now the understanding is that it involves multiple organs, right? And also, it is more of a circulatory disorder in the sense like it induces coagulation. This response to this virus, it induces coagulation in the blood, and it is this coagulation which is largely responsible for this fatalities, basically. But in the initial stages of COVID-19, what happens as soon as an individual is exposed to this novel coronavirus, it kind of lodges over to the receptors which are abundantly present over the respiratory tract mucous membrane, and these viruses enter inside the mucous membrane and they kind of replicate. And the interesting thing is that if our immune system is very good, what happens is the macrophages and the dendritic cells, they act as the first line of defense and they neutralize this viruses basically. But if our immune system is not so very good, especially in conditions like hypertension or diabetes, or even in immune compromised patients, what happens is that it induces a cytokine storm and inflammation, which is what is going to be turning something like a fatal scenario, right? So which are being devised to cope up with this cytokine storm and inflammation. But essentially, what are the areas that we need to target when we are speaking about COVID-19? The first thing is enhancing our host defense mechanisms. And the second thing is to alleviate the cytokine storm and ensure that the circulation is happening properly. And most importantly, the diffusion that is happening at the alveolar level is maintained intact, because recent evidences suggest that, and even clinical observations, especially in Indian scenario, one of the challenges that we face is asymptomatic hypoxia. That is, an individual won't be having any signs at all, and all of a sudden he will be developing a respiratory distress. So what is responsible for that? So what happens is, like, there will be copious mucus production that is happening in the terminal branches of alveoli, which is going to largely restrict the diffusion of air between the lungs and the blood vessels, basically. So that is going to result in hypoxia and eventually manifesting as acute respiratory distress. So where all can yoga be brought in? So some of the information that I'm going to share here will be about in healthy individuals how yoga works on, and even in some infective conditions also, like tuberculosis, how yoga has been proven to be beneficial. And I will also be taking some examples of some obstructive disorders as well, where pranayama practices and yoga practices in general have been beneficial. And in the last, I will be adding up some simple lifestyle measures that we can incorporate into our day-to-day life to ensure that in a way. Okay. So when we speak about the symptoms of COVID-19, like we all know that approximately around 80% of the cases are asymptomatic in Indian scenario. But in the remaining cases, what do we see? They kind of develop sore throat, and then some of them will some this difficulty in breathing, and in some cases, when we take an X-ray, or especially when we take a CT scan, we will be able to see a ground glass opacity. What do we mean by ground glass opacity? Usually, when we image the lungs, the lung area will be appearing black in color. And when there is consolidation, that is when there is fluid accumulation, that area will appear something like a white color enclosed cavity. But in case of COVID-19 and even in some other inflammatory conditions like interstitial lung diseases, we will be able to see some hazy grayish colored areas in some of the areas of the lung tissue. So that is called as ground glass opacities. So if we take into consideration their travel history or their exposure history, in the present scenario, ground glass opacities are most likely indicative of COVID-19. And apart from this, the patient might also develop excessive sputum production, headache, sometimes even spitting, presence of blood in the sputum. And because of hypoxemia to be present, that is decreased oxygen in the blood, it can also be damaging the kidneys as well. And because as a result of this cytokine storm, which I mentioned earlier, there will be a state of hypercoagulability of blood. That is, the blood kind of vessel, which hampers the blood circulation and may turn out to be fatal. So this is what is happened in an individual who is kind of infected. But once again, I reiterate, if our immune system is kind of very healthy and if the immune response is optimal, we should be able to safeguard ourselves from this COVID-19 infection, provided we follow all the measures that like social distancing, washing our hands, wearing masks when we are traveling outside, minimizing the travel, etc. Appropriately. We should be able to safeguard ourselves. I'm sorry about this slide. Keeps jumping. We will be speaking about a multiple basically with respect to pranayama. And as Mr. Anish mentioned, yoga has got 8 limbs. So pranayama is one of the 8 limbs, and it is highly beneficial in restoring the homeostasis of the body. As we know that the cardiopulmonary functions are basically the lung functions are standalone predictors of lifespan or health of an individual. So if you are able to ensure that the lung functions are good, it basically means that we are highly likely to have a healthy body, and our lifespan also should be longer. So even though there is not any evidence to say association between the lifespan and yoga practices, there are anecdotal evidences like the example of a tortoise which breathes slowly and which is capable of living longer. So what happens when I'm breathing slowly? Basically, the metabolic demand of my body decreases. Thereby, we will be able to live longer. So even the definitions which were written thousands of years ago holds good even today, like samatvam yoga uchyate. So yoga is something which brings in equilibrium. So equilibrium in any. So even research studies, whatever we have done, have shown that yoga practices are very unique in its own way. I will take an example here. The Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, which most of us would know. Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama is also called as alternate nostril breathing, wherein we will be breathing in through the left nostril and breathing out through the right nostril. And once again, we'll be breathing in through the right nostril and breathing out through the left nostril. This makes one round of Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama. So what we did was we administered this Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama to 3 groups of individuals. One were a group of hypertensives who were having their blood pressure to be on the higher side, and the second group was normotensives who were having their blood pressure, who were having normal blood pressure rather, and the third group hypertensives these were a group of people who were having less than normal blood pressure. And this same Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, when administered to each of this group of people, produced different results. So medicine, or unlike any medicine for that matter, it is supposed to work in the same way. If, for example, if I take an antipyretic drug like paracetamol or so, it works on bringing down the temperature. It does not identify it is, or it is not capable of understanding what is the need of that particular individual, and it does not decide. But when we perform a pranayama practice, what we have seen was based upon the need of that particular individual at that particular point of time, it will be capable of regulating and ensuring that the adaptation happens optimally. So what did we see in these people who were having high blood pressure? After 10 minutes of Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, their blood pressure levels came down, their peripheral vascular resistance decreased, and their heart rate also came down. Whereas in normotensives, what we saw was their heart rate came down, their blood pressure decreased non-significantly, and but there was not a significant reduction in the blood pressure basically. But interestingly, the cardiac ejection fraction, or the cardiac output rather, came down, which means the body's need was decreasing. And in case of hypotensives, if we see as a regulatory mechanisms in people who are having lower blood pressure, their heart rate will be on the higher side. So after practicing this Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, we saw that their resting heart rate came down significantly, and there was a transient increase in their blood pressure as well. So this indicates that somehow yoga practices are capable of understanding. We still do not know how, understanding. We haven't decoded the underlying neural mechanisms, but yoga practices are capable of understanding what the body needs at that particular point of time, taking into consideration the body's interests, and it should be capable of regulating and ensuring. Making claim at this point of time, but I do have information which will be once again adding up to this claim what I have made now. So proceeding, little bit of philosophy. Most of the non-communicable diseases basically can be. So practices say that an individual exists in 5 different planes. First plane is Annamaya Kosha, that is the plane which is made up of food. The second plane is Pranamaya Kosha, that is the plane. Okay, what is Pranamaya? What is Prana? Prana is force behind any action. So that is for the body to perform any action. It is the prana which facilitates that particular activity. So there are 5 different subtypes of prana which has got its own function. Like there is a specific subtype of prana which is responsible for digestion. There is one subtype of prana which is responsible for the cognitive aspects. So like that, there are 5 different subtypes of prana which has got its own functions that it has to do in the body. So any disturbance in this prana will be having an impact over the physical body. So the third plane is the Manomaya Kosha, or the mental plane. So we all by now know about the psychosomatic ailments, that is the ailments which have got a serious connection between the body and mind. So so this is Manomaya Kosha. So what we say is most of the that is the seed for that particular disorder lies in the mental plane. So whenever there is a disturbance in the mental plane, it affects the pranamaya kosha, and this disturbance manifests as a pathology in the body, or the annamaya, in the physical body, or the annamaya kosha, based on individual's nutritional status, genetic makeup, and the environment in which the individual is living. And this also can be partially extended infectious disease condition. Like for example, if an individual is living in a highly stressful environment, it makes it highly susceptible for some or the other kind of infection, especially in case of COVID-19. Having our inflammation, having the pro-inflammatory cytokines at a check, very, very beneficial. So having a relaxed state of mind also will be beneficial for ensuring that the immune system. So there are different practices which are meant for strength or cleansing or facilitate health of these planes. But today we will be discussing more about pranayama practices, which is beneficial in regulating the pranamaya kosha. Thereby, by regulating this pranamaya kosha, we will also be having healthy impact over the physical plane and the mental plane of the individual. Why is breathing very important? Even when we ask a question to ourselves, can I control my mind? It is a kind of a difficult task. So what yoga suggests is if you are able to control your breath, essentially you will be able to control your mind. So that is where this pranayama comes into picture. So pranayama can be defined or explained in multiple ways. One of the commonest ways how we say is pranayama is all about controlling the breath, but it cannot. This is a very simplistic explanation or understanding of pranayama. But when we look into it further in a deeper way, it is like voluntarily regulating the force behind any action. So this gives us, this pranayama practices gives us the immense capacity to control the physiological functions that is happening in the body. There are several observations which have been made before, like a very recent example that we have, of which most of you all would have heard, is about Swami Rama. He was able to increase his heart rate up to 200 plus beats just on an instruction, or whenever he was instructed, he was able to increase his heart rate to more than 200 beats per minute, which is simply not possible. These are called as involuntary functions, which means that it happens by its own, right? So now these people, by practicing yoga practice, by doing yoga practices, were able to have such control over the involuntary process. Yeah, so with which they were able to kind of keep their body under their complete control. So pranayama is one such practice which gives us, or which enables us gain mastery over regulating the physiological functions. One of the very good examples with specifically with reference used in Buddhist Jitumo. It is called as Jitumo breathing. Buddhist monks in Tibet have been using it very commonly to kind of maintain their body's temperature. And several experiments have been conducted on them. And such experiments, which was conducted inside laboratory, was that these people were able to voluntarily increase their body temperature by up to 15 degrees Celsius. So, which is something not possible with the current physiological understanding that we have. So, such is the extent of benefits that an individual can gain with this pranayama practices. Right. When there will be one common question that we all ask, whether we need to, why do we need to practice pranayama? So exercise sounds better, but all of you at Yogastha are all convinced, and you all have got this wonderful love and affection towards adopting yoga as a lifestyle, Misha. So you all have that liking towards yoga practice. But adding one step to that, why we need to practice yoga? There was one study which was conducted on comparing the lung functions between athletes and yoga practitioners, and these yoga practitioners were not athletes basically. So it was just comparing the lung functions of yoga practitioners and the athletes. What was seen was that these yoga practitioners had greater FEV1 values and greater peak expiratory flow rate. So what is this expiratory FEV1? It is the forced expiratory volume in the first second. That is the amount of air that an individual is able to expel forcefully in the first second of his breath. So if this FEV value is lower, it simply means that there is more of obstruction that is there in the lungs. So if my FEV1, if I'm able to blow out air, it means my airway patency is good. That means I will be able to breathe in and breathe out much more easily without any kind of restriction. So this randomized control trial showed that these yoga practitioners had higher lung functions, or better lung functions, than athletes. And apart from that, these VO2 max, VO2 max is an indicator of the amount of oxygen to when he's performing a maximal at the maximal exercise threshold. So these people were also able to ability, physical ability, by regulating their breath. And we did one study in 2017 where we administered only 20 minutes of pranayama practices every day for a period of 3 months to elite swimmers. And we were also fortunate to have one of the participants of our study part of Indian Olympic. So what we observed in this 20 minutes of intervention for a period of 3 months was that there was an increase of around 80% in their maximum voluntary ventilation, which is an indicator of pulmonary endurance, which means the accessory muscles which are supporting, they were becoming stronger, and they also demonstrated a 32% increase in their forced vital capacity. All this we were able to see only with 20 minutes of practice every day. So what were the practices that we administered there? The first practice was sectional breathing. Sectional breathing involves 3 steps. The first step is abdominal breathing. So what we basically do is we will be sitting straight with our shoulders relaxed, and for the purpose of awareness, maybe we can place one of our palms over the abdomen, and when we are breathing in, only the abdomen should bulge out, and when we are breathing out, the abdomen should sink in. And throughout this process, there should not be any movement in the thoracic cavity at all. This is abdominal breathing. The second step of the sectional breathing is thoracic breathing. So the thoracic breathing, what do we do? The abdomen does not move at all, and the thorax alone moves when we are breathing in and breathing out. And the third step is the clavicular breathing, wherein what we do is the abdomen doesn't move, and when we are breathing in, we fill in the thorax, and then we further put an extra effort to breathe in and raise our shoulders to add up some extra volume of air to enter inside the lungs, and we breathe out completely. So this is called as sectional breathing. So this was the first practice, and the second practice was Kapalabhati. So as we all know, Kapalabhati is bellows breathing. So how do we do that practice? We breathe in completely and we breathe out as fast as possible. How do we breathe out? We pull in the abdomen and blow out the air as fast as possible and relax the abdomen completely, which creates a negative pressure inside the thorax, allowing the air to enter inside the lungs spontaneously, effortlessly. So this practice is Kapalabhati. So the third practice that was administered to them was Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, which we had mentioned earlier. And the last practice was Brahmari Pranayama. So what was Brahmari? So Brahmari, there are several variations of Brahmari. So one of the simplest variations that we can perform or which we can adopt is we can simply close our ears with the index finger so that we do not hear any sound from outside. We breathe in completely, and when we are breathing out, we produce this gentle humming sound as long as possible. So one of the indicators is that if we are able to prolong this humming sound for over 20 seconds, it basically means our cardiopulmonary endurance. So we having a Brahmari time of 20 seconds essentially indicates a better cardiopulmonary state of health. So how long do we practice each of this? So sectional breathing can be done for 10 breaths for each of the 3 practices, and Kapalabhati is strictly contraindicated for hypertensives. Rather, hypertensives should practice under a supervision of a certified yoga teacher. And normal people with normal blood pressure, they can initially start their Kapalabhati practice with 20 or 30 strokes, and gradually by the end of 5 days or 1 week, they can safely extend it to 60 strokes to 90 strokes. And safely practicing it up to 120 strokes is fine. We don't have to practice it more than that. And the next practice was Anulom Vilom Pranayama, Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, or the alternate nostril breathing. So this pranayama can be practiced for a minimum of 12 rounds. But one of the important phenomena that we need to remember with this practice is that the duration of inhalation, the duration of exhalation should be longer than the duration of inhalation. I repeat, the duration of exhalation should be longer than the duration of inhalation. It is for our day-to-day practices, it is highly recommended that we maintain a ratio of 1:2. That is, if I breathe in for 3 seconds, I breathe out for 6 seconds. So gradually I can increase it for 4 and 8, 5 and 10. So the slower the breathing, better it will be for us. So what is the benefit of it? If I'm able to have a slower breathing, and if I'm able to have a better respiratory rhythm, that is having uniform breathing throughout for a considerable amount of time, it will be acting as a reinforcement training to have better respiratory rhythm. Further, what did we see? I have liberally used this term yoga here, but most of the studies that I have cited here, unless I mention, are restricted purely to pranayama practices. So when this pranayama practices were administered for 20 minutes thrice a week for 6 weeks in another study, what was seen was there was a significant improvement in chest wall expansion at upper, middle, and the lower reference points in the thorax, basically. So, especially in people who are having pneumonia or COPD or even in bronchial asthma, the chest wall dynamics would be largely impacted. So, if we are able to make this yoga practices, pranayama practices as a part of our lifestyle, we should be able to also not only temporarily temporarily, what I mean by temporarily is immediately after practice. Not only that, but it is also known to have a prolonged impact over our pulmonary functions, and not only pulmonary functions, but also the chest wall dynamics. So speaking about benefits of specific breathing practices, which we had mentioned before, the first one which I would speak about is Kapalabhati. So the beauty of Kapalabhati is that it is different from hyperventilation, and where it becomes different is the way how we are breathing in. So if we make it, we should be making the inhalation or the inspiration to be completely effortless. After complete forceful exhalation, we leave our abdomen completely freely so that there is a negative pressure created inside the thorax. So the air enters inside spontaneously, effortlessly. So this is Kapalabhati. So when we are practicing Kapalabhati, what happens is that this promotes the process of decarboxylation. So what is decarboxylation? It is a chemical process by which more of carbon dioxide is released. So when more of carbon dioxide is released, what happens as a resultant means there will be more of oxygen to the RBCs. Putting it in other words, the oxygen carrying capacity of the RBCs becomes better or becomes more optimal with practice of Kapalabhati. And apart from that, their cardiac autonomic functions also become better. So what happens when I practice Kapalabhati? Immediately there will be a sympathetic overdrive. That is, my heart rate increases transiently, my blood pressure increases transiently, which is why it is said to be contraindicated for people with hypertension. So, but after some amount of time, this some amount of time differs with expertise or practice, right? So after some amount the recovery period, there will be vagal predominance. So what do I vagus? Okay, what is vagal predominance? Cranial nerves. Cranial nerves are nerves which originate from the brain and innervate multiple organs in the body, right? So this vagus plays a very vital role in regulating the involuntary functions like my heart. It innervates my heart, it innervates my lungs, my diaphragm, and my digestive system completely. So after practicing this Kapalabhati, there will be, after this recovery phase, there will be a vagal predominance. And apart from that, we have also observed that this Kapalabhati practices decreases the fatigue, lethargy, and drowsiness in practitioners. And with respect to Anulom Vilom Pranayama, there are several studies which have documented the benefits of Anulom Vilom Pranayama. Some studies indicate that practicing this Anulom Vilom Pranayama enhances the memory, enhances attention, and practicing Anulom Vilom Pranayama regularly is capable of facilitating an individual to hold the breath without showing any physiological signs of stress. Basically, in a novice, in an individual who does not practice, who do not practice any pranayama, when he is holding his breath, the body considers it to be a threat, and immediately the heart rate increases, and there will be increased signals to kind of put more effort to breathing, basically. But in people who practice this Anulom Vilom Pranayama, they will be able to hold their breath without showing any physiological signs of stress. And practicing this Anulom Vilom Pranayama for as less as 10 minutes was able to show or demonstrate immediate reduction in blood pressure in hypertensive people. With respect to Bhramari Pranayama, it decreases anxiety and panic. It decreases, I'm sorry, there is a mistake in this slide. It is skin conductance. It rather increases the skin resistance, and it also I'm sorry for this error in the slide. It basically increases the skin resistance, or putting it in the other word, it basically decreases the skin conductivity, which also is an indicator of better autonomic control in the body. And apart from that, it also decreases the pulse rate and decreases the extent of the metabolites that are of adrenaline and noradrenaline in the circulation. So this pranayama is kind of important in the present scenario because the stress and anxiety also a major problem that we are facing, especially in the post-COVID era. This mental health will be a challenging phenomenon, is what people predict. So having a better respiratory health will be also reinforcing better mental health states. So how this regulation, there is a strong association between the emotional cortex, or rather between the emotions and our respiration and our heart rate. So if we normally see, whenever we are breathing in, we know that our heart rate increases. Whenever we breathe out, we know that our heart rate decreases. This is an inherent mechanism that is present in the body. So this is called as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So if we would visualize yourself to be in a stressful scenario, what happens? The breathing becomes shallow. Or even if you're sitting and thinking about a negative incident or an incident which has been traumatic to you emotionally, even in that scenario, you will be able to perceive that your respiration is shallow and your heart is beating faster. So which means there is a connection between your emotional cortex or your emotions and the way how you're breathing and how your heart is functioning. So using the negative feedback loops, what happens when you're training your body to breathe slower, it will be having a reinforcing mechanism over your emotional cortex and pacify the emotional cortex there, and you will be able to have better states of relaxation. And this has also been demonstrated with the change of amount of neurotransmitters like dopamine, GABA, everything to change with yoga practices positively, indicating and suggesting that yoga practices are also beneficial in overcoming depression or in other mental health conditions, including schizophrenia. Especially this Kapalabhati practice, I have not mentioned that in the slide, but this practice of Kapalabhati for 1 minute was capable of regulating the blood flow in the frontal lobes of the brain for up to 23 minutes. So 23 minutes was the amount of complaints that we were able to get from the schizophrenic patients in the laboratory, but there could have been longer changes as well. But just 1 minute of Kapalabhati was able to produce changes in the circulation and the frontal lobe of the brain for up to 23 minutes. Such is the effectiveness of this practice. I would like to deviate slightly from this pranayama and also emphasize on one another interesting practice and very beneficial practice called as Kunjala Kriya. It is also called as voluntarily induced vomiting. So what do we do in this pranayama? What do we do in this Kriya? We drink 5%, 5 grams of salt mixed in 1 liter of warm water. We drink this water in the morning in empty stomach completely to how much ever extent it is possible for us to drink without any gap, and then we voluntarily using our fingers we trigger vomiting, and we vomit out the water whatever we have consumed inside as much as possible. So this technique is mentioned to be very beneficial in promoting mental wellness and also washing out the metabolic waste products from the body, translating from the classical text. So we wanted to study how this Kriya practice is having an impact over the pulmonary functions. And what we saw was that there was once again an significant increase in post inspiratory volume in the first second, which once again indicates a reduction in the pulmonary airway resistance. And apart from that, there was also an increase in slow vital capacity and reduction in expiratory reserve volume. Both of this indicate that the lung volumes become better. So expiratory reserve volume simply means the amount of air that stays back inside the lungs after a complete exhalation. So if I'm able to empty my lung completely, I'm making my lungs available, open for more fresh air to enter inside it. So that will be beneficial once again. So my expiratory reserve volume decreases, and my slow vital capacity once again is an indicator of my lung functions and the endurance of the accessory muscles of my respiratory system. So they were also shown to be becoming better. And in another study, what we saw was the heart rate variability patterns also to shift towards parasympathetic predominance. The respiratory rate came down significantly. So we speculate that if an individual is practicing this kriya, not just this kriya, but in terms of practicing this pranayama also, there should be long-term change in this respiratory pattern as well. Because if we are having a proper respiratory rhythm, that in itself will be having a huge impact over the way how metabolism happens inside our body. So in summary, what we have seen is that the lung functions becomes better with this pranayama practices. And there was also a study which was conducted in COPD patients, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. So these people, or in this pathology, basically in people who are suffering from COPD, what happens is that the diffusion capacity in the alveolar membrane is largely affected. So which results in patients with COPD to be having hypoxia, and they will be having difficulty in breathing. They'll be gasping for air, basically. So with 4 months of pranayama practices to these patients, the alveolar diffusion capacity happening at the alveolar membrane became significantly better. So this is once again a problem which is happening in COVID patients. So even in asymptomatic patients, just to avoid any kind of complications at a later phase, these practices can safely be administered. I'm also happy to share that in the state of Tamil Nadu, from the Department of Indian Medicine, all the government doctors, over 100 plus doctors serving in various hospitals in Tamil Nadu, and they have been able to administer these practices to patients who are suffering from COVID. and even to high risk people who are suffering from COVID. And even only in Chennai, in one specific place, they were able to administer these pranayama practices for over 5,000 people, and they have shown remarkable benefits with these practices. And all this is being documented, and soon we should be having some good publication coming out of it, demonstrating the applicability of these pranayama practices along with some simple lifestyle modifications for benefiting these COVID patients. And not only these pulmonary functions, these breathing practices, especially this yogic breathing practices like Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama, was able to increase the salivary secretion, which contains the proteins like beta defensins, which play a key role. This beta defensin is known as an antimicrobial protein, which kind of plays a vital role in eliciting immune response basically. So these yogic breathing practices were able to increase the salivary secretion, which contains the proteins which have a key role in immune response. So, and there was also an increase in nerve growth factor expression in the saliva after yogic breathing practices. In general, yoga practices alleviates inflammation. So alleviating inflammation is very essential to have an optimal immune response. And that too, one of the challenges with this COVID is that this coronavirus is capable of escaping or escaping the human, escaping our immune defense system by down regulating a set of receptors called as pattern recognition receptors. So it is through these pattern recognition receptors our immune system will be able to identify these microbes that are there inside the body. So if as this COVID coronavirus, novel coronavirus is capable of down regulating this pattern recognition receptors, it can easily evade the immune system. So, but still, it is not kind of completely understood how having an optimal immune system is capable of combating the coronavirus. But still, one of the observation which has been strongly documented is that if an individual's immune system, if an individual is healthy, if an individual's immune system is functioning optimally, he should be able to kind of prevent incidence of COVID for himself. One another age-old paper, which was published in 1984, demonstrated that with 1 hour of yoga practices involving asanas and pranayama for 6 days in a week for 4 months was capable of increasing this fibrinolytic activity. So what happens if the fibrinolytic activity is increased? The clot formation will be affected, and this platelet aggregation time and partial thromboplastin time, these both are also indicators of how fast the time taken for the blood clot to be formed. So these indicators were also prolonged, which means that these practices are having an obvious role in prevention of cardiovascular and thrombotic disease. As this disseminated intravascular coagulation is one of the challenges that we have in COVID-19. So pranayama practices can safely be administered in asymptomatic individuals and people who are having very minimal, very minimal symptoms like sore throat. They can practice this pranayama very safely to kind of enhance their host immune defense mechanisms. So did a study in understanding how yoga facilitates adaptation in extreme stressful conditions, extreme environmental stressful conditions, and in healthy individuals, basically in Antarctica. This was a gene expression study. And what we did was we simply took the group of genes which are associated with the stress response in people who practicing yoga. So what you can see here, this red color spots indicates those genes or a set of genes associated with a particular function to be upregulated. And blue color means these set of genes associated with the function to be downregulated. All of these are processes associated with stress. So what we saw was that in the control group, that is the people who were not practicing yoga, all the processes associated with stress were upregulated, whereas in people who were practicing yoga, the number of genes associated with stress response which were regulated was also less, and even in those which were significantly differentially regulated, most of them were down regulated. So how did this happen? What was the mechanism underlying it? We need further experiments for doing this. So speaking specifically, what were we able to see in yoga group? One of the challenges in any infection for that matter is this infection, the immune response, especially the release of this pro-inflammatory cytokines, everything happens through NF kappa B activation. This in yoga practitioners, what we were able to see was there was a bypass of this NF activation, and the similar kind of immune response was activated through this MYD88 independent pathway. So this is also implicated in immune response, but pro-inflammatory cytokines were not triggered at all. So this is something which we found to be very, very interesting. This is not yet published, but this was a recent finding from the work that we had done. And one another thing that we saw in general was in a stressful scenario, in an environmentally stressful scenario, there was a chaotic situation inside multiple in the regulatory processes of an individual who was not practicing yoga. Like there were multiple conflicting signals, for apoptosis signals, genes associated with apoptosis were upregulated, genes associated with cell replication were also upregulated. Genes associated with the DNA repair mechanisms were also upregulated. It was all kind of chaotic. It appeared like more of a trial and error response which the body was putting in that stressful scenario. But in case of yoga practitioners, what we I'm missing slide. Okay, so in yoga practitioners, what we saw was the response was highly organized. What we saw, to be very specific, what we saw was that the DNA replication, the cell replication genes were all kind of down-regulated, and specific DNA integrity checkpoint genes were all upregulated. So somehow yoga practices are capable of making the body understand what it needs to do at that particular point of time, taking into consideration the body's inherent abilities to manage that particular environment, and thereby make the body to function optimally. So, summarizing all that we have spoken so far, pranayama practices basically increases their respiratory capacity by strengthening the respiratory accessory muscles and also regulating the chest wall dynamics. And it promotes or facilitates adaptation at the alveolo-capillary membrane to facilitate better diffusion, and it alleviates inflammation, and it facilitates better relaxation as well. And the lung compliance becomes better through strengthening of this diaphragm, which we have also been observing through increased maximum voluntary ventilation, right? So speaking about the next area for mental health, which is also very, very vital in this COVID times, through regular practice of pranayama, it facilitates dopamine synthesis, which is known to play a role in neuroplasticity. And the extent of IL-6 in the CNS also kind of decreases with pranayama practices. And in the study which we did in environmental condition, we also saw that these practices were capable of alleviating the perseverative cognition. So, what is perseverative cognition? It is the extent of rumination or repetitiveness thinking that an individual is having. So, these yoga practices were capable of alleviating perseverative cognition. And as my perseverative cognition is lower, I am able to have this individual will be able to have a better sleep in the night. Thereby, the following day, daytime dysfunction will be minimized with yoga practices. This has been observed in Antarctica in extreme environments. The finding that we had, what we saw was this rumination was came down very significantly following yoga practices, and the sleep also became better, wherein specifically we saw a significant difference with daytime dysfunction. So, some simple lifestyle strategies that we can adopt. Most of us would know these strategies, but I'm just willing to emphasize on this simple strategy. Hydrated. There are some basic, simple things that we need to kind of know with respect to hydration. That is, we should not be consuming water when we are having our food. So the safest time to consume water would be like half an hour before or half an hour after our food. And how much do we consume water? Drinking half a liter of water together is not advisable, or it is not good for the circulatory system. It will be putting an excessive load over the heart and over the kidneys. So the safest amount of drinking water would be periodically consuming water up to 150 ml or 200 ml periodically. And safely, an individual has to consume 1.5 to 2.5 liters of water. And this hydration is also known to play important role in regulating how our immune system is working. And also, it is known to have an impact over the bowel movements also. So, as we know that approximately around 70 to 80% of the immune system is present in the gut associated lymphoid tissue. Maintaining a healthy gut is very, very vital. So in people who are having constipation, there is elevated count of the CD4, CD3, CD4, CD25 cells, which is also an indicator of inflammation to be present in their body. So relieving this constipation through any means was also reflected over these cell counts. So having a healthy gut is very, very vital. So how do we have a healthy gut? By consuming sufficient amount of water, by consuming good amount of fiber in the diet. We should be able to enhance the health of our gut and gut microbiome. And light, we all know it is a rich source of vitamin D. The body kind of synthesizes that, and coincidentally, what we observe is most of the patients who are landing up in ICU with COVID-19 are all identified to have vitamin D deficiency. So if we are also able to address this vitamin D deficiency either nutritionally and also by safe exposure to sun, that will also be beneficial. And apart from that, apart from benefiting us from COVID-19 through regulating the immunity and also through regulating the immunity, exposure to sunlight is also it also facilitates release of serotonin. So serotonin, we all know that it is known to play a vital role in regulating mood and relaxation. So, and this vitamin D also has this anticoagulant effect. So this is yet another reason for us to expose ourselves to sunlight. So safer time for exposing to sunlight would be early in the morning or late in the evening. And as far as possible, we can avoid using the sunscreen formula, which kind of completely inhibits the UVB rays, which are essential for synthesis of vitamin D. And with respect to dietary regulation, fasting can be adopted as one of the efficient strategies. So, if we are apprehensive about fasting, or if we are afraid of doing or skipping a meal safely, the easiest alternative would be to consume fruits for at least one meal a day, at least once in a week. Making one meal a week to be with fruits to begin with would at least be partially beneficial. For those who are interested, you can try practicing uh, intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting involves 18 to 24 hours abstinence from uh, food completely for at least 2 days in a week. This is intermittent fasting. And interestingly, um, in people who are practicing this intermittent fasting, it is observed that this NLRP3 inflammasome pathway is kind of suppressed. And it is the same NLRP3 inflammasome pathway which is upregulated in COVID-19. So this also kind of plays hand in hand. That is, this intermittent fasting also plays a vital, might also, I cannot claim here without an evidence, but this intermittent fasting also might be beneficial in alleviating inflammation, and also some way or the other helpful in minimizing the risk for COVID-19. I would like to conclude my talk, and I thank everyone at Yogastha and IIT Bombay for giving this opportunity and your patient hearing. So, if there are any doubts, we can have some question answers. Thank you.
So if there are any doubts, then you can raise your hand, I think, and maybe you can ask a question. Also, Ayana has on the chat, we've shared a feedback link to, if you have any feedback, suggestions, and further questions, you can also share them with us there.
So okay. So there is a question in the chat. If they have, will the yoga practices be demonstrated? If it is interest to people, I can make a small demonstration of how we practice Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama. So we take this mudra called as Nasikagra mudra, where we hold the index finger and the middle finger, and the thumb goes to the right nostril and the ring finger goes to the left nostril. So completely, breathe out completely, and I close my right nostril and breathe in through the left nostril and breathe out through the right nostril. And once again, I breathe in through the right nostril and breathe out through the left nostril. This makes one round of Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama. So for practicing this Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama or any of these Pranayama practices, it implies that an individual sits with his back erect on the ground or on the chair. Wherever an individual sits, he has to sit with his back erect. And especially for Kapalabhati, it is always advised that an individual sits on the ground in Vajrasana or Padmasana or Ardha Padmasana, or just in a Sukhasana with folded legs. And one more word of caution with Kapalabhati: if one is suffering from low back pain, it is also contraindicated to practice Kapalabhati, because this Kapalabhati, we tend to forcefully exhale, which will be putting a huge amount of thrust over the low back region, so which may aggravate the low back pain. So if you are having low back pain or sciatica, it is better to avoid Kapalabhati and safely practice Anulom Vilom Pranayama or Nadi Shuddhi Pranayama and Brahmari Pranayama. So demonstrating Brahmari Pranayama, the simplest like the index finger over the ears and completely closing the ears so that we don't hear any sound from outside. We breathe in, and while breathing out, we produce a humming sound like this. And prolong it as long as possible. The safest, I mean, minimal, the simplest recommendation is that we have up to 20 seconds, at least 20 seconds of this per inhalation. So this Brahmari time is once again a direct indicator of the cardiopulmonary fitness or endurance. The last practice was Kapalabhati, which I had mentioned. So what we do in Kapalabhati is we breathe in completely and we forcefully, if you can see, what I do is, if you notice my abdomen, I breathe in now. I breathe, I had exhaled. I leave the abdomen outside, which creates a negative pressure inside my thorax, and the air goes inside spontaneously. So initially, if you are a novice, you can start practicing safely at 20 or 30 strokes, and gradually you can increase it to 60 to 90 strokes, and eventually by the end of 10 days, you can make it up to 120 strokes. As 60 strokes practiced in 2 times. Excuse me.
Right, thank you. That, I guess, that covers all the practices that we have discussed. If there are any other questions, feel.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. See, there are limits, there are quantities, for example, 10 minutes, somewhere 20 minutes, and things like that. I mean, you have given quantitative things for various, asanas or various processes. So, can one do a little less?
Yes, sir, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. But they should achieve to attain it. It is not necessary that they should stick to 20 or whatever is the number you have prescribed. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, because it varies from an individual to individual based upon the age, based upon the environment where we are living in. So the lung capacities vary. So the target is 20 seconds. So it may vary all the way from 3 seconds to 40 or 50 seconds, and sometimes even up to 60 seconds. So our goal is 20 seconds. We'll slowly work towards reaching that goal. That's right. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, madam.
So I had 2 questions. One of it is that I had heard many times that yoga should be practiced at the same time every day and possibly in the morning. And the second question is, how can we recommend yoga practices to people who are having arthritis issues, like people who are old, so they find it very difficult. They usually don't practice yoga for the reason that they cannot sit on the floor or they cannot move their legs very freely. So how can we make them come into yoga practices? So these are my 2 questions. Thank you.
So the first question with respect to the timing of yoga practices. So it is generally recommended that we practice, we do yoga practices either early in the morning or evening. It is usually recommended that we follow a certain time, basically. If for any reason, if we are unable to adopt it, there is no harm in it, basically. So if we are practicing one day in the morning, next day we are not able to practice in the morning, and if we have time in the evening, it's absolutely fine. It will not produce any adverse effects for sure. But if we are having a regulated lifestyle, regulated regimen, it is always better. So the second question, with respect to people who are having arthritis, there are modified yoga practices which can be safely be administered to people who are having arthritis. In fact, there are standardized, validated yoga modules for arthritis which are available basically. So I can share it to the organizers from whom maybe you can take it now. So as a general instruction, what we can do with respect to practices in yoga called as Chittalikarana Vyayama and Sukshma Vyayama, which are nothing but loosening practices. So this involves loosening of each and every joint. And these are very simple practices which do not demand them to sit on the ground or overstretch themselves or overburden themselves. These are very simple practices which kind of enhances their range of movement, of range of motion at each and every joint, and it decreases the rigidity and spasticity of their muscles, which would give them a very good feel right from the second or third day from the time they have started their practice. And apart from that, these pranayama practices specifically will be giving them a very good state of relaxation. So with increasing age, the sleep tends to be disturbed, and most of the times senior citizens tend to be occupied with some of the other thoughts in the mind. So in order to overcome their mental stress and also to promote their sleep, pranayama practices can be a safer alternative as an introductory practices basically. And based upon the age of an individual, condition of an individual, we can safely prescribe a set of yoga practices specifically designed for them basically. But general modules for arthritis are available, which I can share with the organization.
Thank you, sir.
So I have one question. Can I ask?
Yes, sir.
So I have a lower back pain. On that case, sitting 5 minutes constantly and doing this Anulom Vilom, it becomes difficult for me. On that case, any other posture I can do Anulom Vilom or Bhamri Pranayam?
Sir, it is generally advised that we sit and perform these pranayama practices. So if you are having pain, there are a series of practices called Makarasana series. You can refer to Bihar School of Yoga textbooks where they prescribe 4 practices in the name of Makarasana series.
Could you please?
Alternatively, it's called Bihar School of Yoga. Is a school, yoga school basically. They have this Makarasana series of crocodile postures. It comes as 4 practices which you have to perform lying down on your back. If I may explain orally, what we have to basically do is you have to lie down on your back and hold and keep below your neck with your elbows constantly touching over the ground, and hold both the legs, and you have to place the heels closer to your buttocks and your knees touching each other. And staying in this position without raising your elbows, you have to just twist the lower half of the body. That is, if you imagine that these two are your foot, this foot should not be moving at all. The foot should be firmly placed on the ground, and they can move like this, either on both the sides. That's all. But it should not be moving to the left or right. And what you do is, like, you have to take both the knees to the left side, stay there for 5 breaths, and when you are there with your knees to the left, your elbows constantly lies on the ground. You do not turn on any of the sides. And similarly, you perform it on the opposite side. This is one practice. And the second practice is same way, having your legs folded, you can just put your one right leg over the left leg, legs crossed one over the other. And what you need to do is, if you're having a right leg on the top, you take your lower half of the body to the opposite side. That is, if you're having a right leg on the top, you have to twist to the left. Stay there for 3 to 5 breaths comfortably, return back and practice it on the opposite side. These should be able to relieve your back pain almost immediately, sir. And this can be safely practiced even if there is disc.
So I have a disc bulge, L4, L5 disc bulge.
You can safely practice this, sir.
And one more.
Thing that you need to be cautious is that you yourself even if you are able to twist your, turn your legs up to 30 degrees or 40 degrees, it's okay. So gradually you can extend it with reduction in your back pain. So these practices immediately would be beneficial and relieve the back pain. Yes, sir.
All right, I think since we're now running slightly short of time, we can take one more question, if that's okay. So if anybody has a question, we'll take this next question as the last one, and then we can conclude the session.
Yeah, may I ask a question, please?
Go ahead, yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my question was, I just wanted to understand the difference between Anulom Vilom Pranayam and Nari Shodhan Pranayam.
Madam, there are different schools which make a small level difference. So in Nadi Shuddhi, we basically breathe in through one nostril, breathe out through the other nostril, and we repeat the same the other side. But some schools suggest that in Anulom Vilom Pranayama, we practice it with breath holding or kumbhaka. So for all practical reasons, we can simply consider that it is alternate nostril breathing, wherein we breathe in through the left nostril, breathe out through the right, and once again breathe in through the right and breathe out through the left. So for health seekers, it is generally recommended that we do not practice breath holding initially.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much to everyone who asked those wonderful questions. Thank you. A great big thank you to Sir. A virtual round of applause for for taking the time out of your schedule to actually be with us here today. It was a very wonderful session. We love like both the technical part, like the thorough discussion, and also so that was a wonderful, great all-round session. And we encourage all the participants to fill in the feedback. Email address that we have mentioned in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you in the further. There's another webinar by the actual have common yoga protocol and the yogathon sessions planned. So definitely we look forward to seeing you there, and have a nice day. And if there are any concluding words from Sir, that's what we'd like to hear.
So we have this International Yoga Day coming up day after tomorrow. So we all know that, yeah, so we follow these norms, maintaining social distancing, practicing yoga at home, the place where we are. And most important thing is practicing yoga regularly and adopting the simple lifestyle strategies would definitely ensure us to stay healthy, remain healthy, and let us spread this word of yoga to the entire community where we are, and let us make our community healthier and COVID free as soon as possible. And thanks for this wonderful initiative from Yogastha for organizing this wonderful event. And thank you.
All right. Thank you.